Welcome to the panel, Chang Tien, his life and art. And I'm the moderator today, Yongjin. I'm also the curator for this exhibition. And today we have our panelist, Mr. Teo Hang Woo, art writer and independent curator. Clap. Mr. Ho So Ping, the artist and director of ArtCommune Gallery. And Mrs. Teresa Yao, Mr. Fan's daughter. So I'll start off with a bit of introduction into Mr. Fan's life and art. Mr. Fan Chang Tien was born 1907 in Jieyang, China, into a Teochew literati environment. In China, he studied the classics and eventually graduated from the Teachers Training College for Art in Shantou, 1923. He later furthered his studies in the famed Tsinghua Art College in Shanghai, then a hotbed of idealistic aesthetic activities that sought to modernize ink painting for a modern Chinese nation. Among the faculty members were famous artists such as Huang Binghong, Xu Beihong, Pan Tianshou, and Feng Zikai. One of Fan Chang Tien's teachers in Tsinghua was the Haipai Shanghai School master Zhu Wenyun, who was himself a nephew of Wu Changshuo, the greatest Haipai practitioner of all. Zhu Wenyun was known to have emphasized Wu's ideal of consolidating the four components of the self-composed poem, calligraphy, painting, and seals, Shi Shu Hua Ying, to form a singular total aesthetic expression. Fan's adaptation of this ideal in his painting may have been derived from his study under Zhu Wenyun. After graduating from Tsinghua, Fan enrolled in Changming Professional Art College, also in Shanghai. Here he had a chance to meet and study under the famed Wang Zhen, also known as Wang Yiting, who was part of the faculty. An even more important mentor-student relationship formed between Fan and Wang Geyi, a student of Wu Changshuo. Wang was seen as one of the most important students of Wu Changshuo, succeeding to Wu's post in the Xiling Seal Art Society. Their relationship will continue for the rest of Fan's life, and through Fan's introduction, Wang Geyi was able to make trips to Singapore and exhibit in the National Museum Art Gallery. Fan graduated in 1931, returning to Shantou. There he initiated the Lingdong School of Art with fellow Teochew artists such as Sun Peigu, through the Yitao Painting Society, Yitao Hua She, and Yinghuang Art Academy of Arts, Yinghuan Yishu Xuexiao, both of which he co-founded. Fan gradually established himself as an artist, exhibiting in China as well as Hong Kong. Fan lived and worked in China through the war with Japan, contributing his paintings to fundraising exhibitions. In 1948, Fan was sent to Bangkok to teach art. There he settled into the large Teochew population, befriending Teochew intellectuals such as Rao Zongyi and other diasporic artists such as Chang Tien. In this exhibition are two pieces of calligraphy inscribed by Rao and Zhang in commendation of Fan's artistry. Fan also published a catalogue during this time with its title inscribed by Chang Tien. As the Chinese Civil War escalated, Fan was prevented from returning to China. He would never return to China as a Chinese citizen. Fan moved to Singapore in 1956 at the age of 49, with half a lifetime of experiences and art behind him. He was initially invited to hold a solo exhibition at the invitation of the Singapore Chinese Chamber of Commerce before being offered a teaching job at Chongqing High School. Fan obtained permanent residency in 1960 and citizenship in 1976. Establishing himself in his Balestier Road studio Su Lan Shi, the Pure Orchid Studio, some of the paintings on display here has this studio inscribed as a place of execution. Fan taught and nurtured a generation of Singaporean ink artists. In doing so, Fan offered practitioners an alternative aspect to ink painting, one that drew more directly from Haipai traditions than those taught in NAFA. Fan offered his students an education in the classics of ink, from the landscapes of the Four Wangs to monochrome ink works that traces its genealogy through the Haipai artists to the earlier Yangzhou eccentrics. Among the many illustrious students of Fan are the late artists Choi Kei, Ling Che-ying, and Chuan Keng Boon, as well as Nai Sui Ling, Tan Wei Pang, Chen Ke-chan, and Lin Kei-hyung. Some of his students came together to found the Hua Han Art Society in 1972, with Fan as their honorary advisor. In 1986, Fan was warded for some months in the Singapore General Hospital. Even on his hospital bed, Fan could not put down his brush. He called for some ink and paper and executed a few paintings of birds and banana trees, one of which is displayed over there. And in 1987, after three weeks after executing those paintings, Fan passed away. The art of Fan Chang Tien stands as an alternative modernity in Singaporean art, greatly diversifying the ink practices of his own generation and that of his students. In 1989, the National Museum Art Gallery held a retrospective exhibition to celebrate his artistry. This was followed by a donation of 50 pieces by the artist's family to the National Museum in 1993. Today, Mr. Fan's legacy is assured and his paintings are regularly exhibited in the National Gallery. So I'll now pass the mic to Mrs. Yao, our first panelist. No, you are the first. So,
thank you, Yongjing, for sharing my late father's life in China. He was already well known, and in fact, he had no intention to leave China. He was head of a county town chief, and he determined to stay, even knowing well that there was an impending change of government. This is something we found out when doing research into his life in China before we went to Beijing last August for an exhibition. But then fate sent him away to Thailand, as what Yongjin had said, for donation from overseas Chinese to rebuild a teaching school that was destroyed by Japanese bombing. So he couldn't return. When he went to Thailand, all activities of donation already started, no more. It was prohibited by the Thai government. But he couldn't get home because civil war escalated. Then he was stranded there in Thailand for 8 years. But then destiny brought him to Singapore. The first time I met this tall and handsome man was in 1955, when my mother brought me to Thailand for holiday to introduce me to him, little knowing that he was going to be my father, my adopted father. The next year, in 1956, he came to exhibit Chinese Chamber of Commerce, and subsequently was invited to teach in Zhongzheng High School. That was where Lin Ziying, his very first student, came from. That was an episode that he has to go back to Thailand, and mom's family, all of us, will have to migrate to Thailand as well. So he will not be a Singaporean, because at that time, there was an exercise that no more foreign graduates are allowed to teach in Singapore, mainly because they wanted jobs for those graduates from Nanyang University. But then we were fortunate in the sense that our then Prime Minister, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, he recognized talent, he valued talent. He has a vision and a foresight to admit talent into Singapore for the good of Singapore. So with his intervention, finally, father was reinstated by Ministry of Education. And hence, he went to teach in Whampoa Secondary School. And that was where Nai Swee Leng and many of the others, his cohort of students, came from. So that was how he was based in Singapore. Eventually became a Singaporean. Yong Chin had asked me what was Mr. Fang's artistic practice in Singapore and how did he come to teach a generation of ink artists. During the Civil War in China, while Fang was stranded in Thailand, he lost the whole family's wealth as well as 7 members of his family to persecution and to suicide. I think that somehow changed his outlook in life. So when he came to Singapore, he seldom socialized much. He put all his energy into his work and also into teaching, because as you heard from Yong Chin, he was an art educator already back home in China. He went to Teachers Training College and he was teaching in training school, secondary school, high schools, even in Hong Kong. That was where, in fact, he met Wang Jingbi. You know Wang Jingbi, one of the renowned artists in Taiwan. They were in Hong Kong together. Usually after the war, those people associated with the nationalist government, they will follow the government to Taiwan because its communist has taken over. And Wang Jingbi was the artist we often mention about him. He was the one who told one of the collectors from Singapore who went to his place, asked, "Can you please draw a bamboo painting for me?" Then Wang Jingbi asked him. The collector was Xie Sumei, but he passed away already. I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Singapore." "Don't you know you have a bamboo king in Singapore? Why do you come to me?" And that's how he named Bamboo King in Singapore. Nobody knew about him, in fact, because he was absolutely very low-key. So as an educator, and also being steeped in Chinese skill, traditional Chinese ink painting with the 3 perfections of poetry, calligraphy, and painting. In fact, it should be 4. Normally people say about 3, but it's 4, together with the seal carving. These are the artistic heritage of Chinese culture. The Chinese ink painting with all these 4 perfections. So Chang Tien, being deeply rooted in traditional Chinese art, he will never consider a painting complete without the inscription of a calligraphy or a poetry. So normally what will he do is he will paint the painting, hang it up, look at it. He will sit himself on a reclining antique chair and play his erhu. Erhu, the Teochew musical instrument, and he will listen to the singing of the canary birds. He likes the birds, observe their movement, and he always commented if they have very beautiful pitch, nice tone, and all that. He kept those. He also planted bamboo everywhere in his backyard, palms in his front yard. So he will look at his painting and started to compose a poetry for that painting. Sometimes it will take him a few days. Others may even take him a few months. So that is how you see all his painting with all the poetic descriptions. Many times, Paul, my husband, and myself, we urge him, forget about all this poetry, you take so long. Might just sign the name, but everybody else just paint and sign name. You know, in Singapore, oh, I don't see people writing a lot of poetry, just sign name. So reluctantly, you do see painting just his name and the seal. But he to him, a painting is complete only with calligraphy and the painting. That is what he was like. And then, anyway, he being a well-known artist, not only an artist back in China, he's also an art educator. So here in Singapore, he continued relentlessly to teach younger Singaporeans, those with art talents. He passed to them the technique of the Hai Pai, the Chinese technique of Shanghai School of Art. He inculcated into them the strong foundation in the basic format of Chinese paintings. And he stressed to them, if you do not have skills, even excellent tools, you will be in vain. And he told them, it's just like music. If the students do not know chords or scales, how they evolve, it will not be proper structured music. So, you know, even in Western painting, if you do not know composition, if you do not know color theory, you do not know perspective, you don't have good foundation, how you evolve, it will not be good. So he drilled into his students. He's a very, very good teacher. So he's really an excellent art tutor and art educationist. His students were taught not how to paint with the hands, but starting from the legs onwards. You have to stand on your legs in a pugilistic position, so that when you move your hands and arms, your energy of the whole body will transmit into your arms and hands for the painting. He taught children that. And from very young, he pushed his students to openly demonstrate, confidently in front of large audience. You see, all his Hai Pai students, anytime demonstration, they go do it. And it's all father's teaching. He's really an excellent teacher. That is what I want to say. To quote Mr. Choi Wen-yang, Mr. Choi said, Fang's artistic legacy in the development of Singapore art scene is immense, significant, and of great consequence. I think Mr. Choi Wen-yang also appreciates father's teaching very much. Today, Fang's students, School of Art artists, they are all artists, well-known artists in their own right, like Sui Ling, AK, the late week AK, and a lot of others. Even my friend here, he's the third or fourth generation. All of them, most of them sometimes also are art teachers, like Fang used to do. They teach in community centers, schools, and associations, just like what Fang did before. Mr. Fang did not collect fees from his students. Partly, this is his way of giving back to Singapore. Singapore is adopted country. He still loves his China. He will always never forget the place of his birth. He didn't want to leave, in fact. Yeah. So his way of giving back to Singapore for providing him a safe environment, a secure environment to pursue his art, and also to paint whatever he wanted. If he were to be back in China, most probably he could be sent to the farm to be re-educated, or could have been persecuted like the members of his family. So he was very grateful, and our family is also thankful for Singapore's, safe environment for him to pursue his work. The next thing is, shall I leave it for? Yeah, the painting, this thing. Okay, you want? Okay. Before that. Okay. You want to talk about? Okay. Now I would like, they want me to share. Yes, wait. Share my personal learning experience and the appreciation of Mr. Fang's works. During his lifetime, most of them took him for granted because of his humble nature of not seeking attention, gain, or fame. Now he has left us with such a nice, beautiful legacy. That motivated me to do research so that I can understand, know his work better and appreciate what he has left us better. So I enlisted the help of my nephew, I'm not an artist, so I asked Mr. Matthias Yao I learned a lot of things from him. And also I'm fortunate that I have my husband, Mr. Paul Yao. He's effectively bilingual. I'm English stream, educated in English, so I do not quite understand all the calligraphy, the words, the 草字 in the painting. Each time when we go home, we just see him enjoy himself, never even bother asking, what did you write? And but he was generous. Sometimes I say, oh, I like this picture better than the other. Then he will say, as though you know. 你懂得什么? Anyway, at the end of the day, he will, 你喜欢拿回家啦. Then I will take back lah. You see. So as he say, he was very quiet and very not socializing much. One day when one of his students took him to exhibition, then he went to the exhibition, he said, so many people there, why so many people? Today as opening, he said, I'm coming to see paintings, I'm not coming to see people, take me home. So he is that kind, he want to spend his time, don't want to waste time doing his work. Anyway, talking about appreciation of his work, when I have 2 paintings, they are beautiful, or 3, 4 paintings, and then now I end up with a legacy. I have to curate them for exhibition. Then there are 2 paintings, both beautiful, but I like one against the others. Then I say, how am I going to judge? Because there must be certain criteria to know what is beautiful. As like you judge a beauty contest, you also have criteria, how many marks for physical beauty, how many marks for walking, how many marks for posture, the intelligence. So there must be things like that. All right? So I try to do research because I learned that what makes a piece of art good is not just the aesthetic appearance. It's not just beautiful appearance, but how the painting can evoke your feelings, your senses through the many nuances in the painting. Fang's landscape, I would like the landscape first. Fang's landscape painting appealed to me in this way. Its charm, the charm of the landscape grows on you. The more you look at it, I think Johan will agree with me. He told me the special thing about Fang is because it's charming. Yes, the more you look at it, the more you are awed by it. The painting evoked feelings of peace and joy with its tranquility and its serenity. The landscape seemed to be beckoning you, come and explore the untrodden track with me, come into to listen to the birds, to listen to the distant sound of the waterfall. The beautiful scene took your mind away from the hustle and bustle of daily mundane life. In landscape, what do we look? We look into 4 elements. First, look at the folds of the mountains, the rocks, the stones. Number 2, the vegetation. Look at all the trees, the bushes, all the grass. Number 3, you look at the water. Waterfall. Is there waterfall there? Yes, waterfall. Brooks, ponds. Look at those. And number 4, you look at the clouds and the mist. You look at them. Observe the many ink strokes. The ink strokes. In Chinese, we call it chunfa. Chunfa. Not the chunfa, I think the artists will know. Like nail head lah, rat tail, twisted wire. All these chunfa, I think artists, they all will tell you. But no, but much more than that. For Chang Tien's painting is really captivating in the sense that he could combine all the chunfa, all the ink strokes of the old masters, and then evolve them into typical form, which it echoes the past, and yet it is contemporary, all his own style. The unpretentious plain bamboo is Fang's favorite subject. It's symbol of integrity, humility, and all that is very entrenched in Chinese culture. Fang inscribed in his painting that if those ignorant of its significance, then they are like frogs in the well, not knowing how big the sky or the universe is. Because a lot of people can, why you every day paint bamboo? Why you paint bamboo? You should paint something else so that, Another thing I forgot to say that Fang did not have to paint with expectation of whether he could sell the painting or not. Because he was fortunate. My mother was able to support him, and he didn't have to sell his paintings for a living. And that part also partly a reason that he never sold his painting at all. To be a good bamboo painter, I was told and I learned that you have to paint bamboo in rain, bamboo after rain, in hot sun, or little breeze, strong breeze, light breeze, or even young and old bamboo. This is a young bamboo. It's a young one. Young bamboo, it has to be nen. Nen means very soft, very resilient, very supple. So when you can bend it, let go, it will fight back. And it's young, it's very tender. Whereas there's a strong bamboo. You see the stem, in one stroke, breeze stroke, his bamboo is entirely different. In light and in shadow, one stroke for the stem. The stroke looks cylindrical. A lot of bamboo painters, they paint the bamboo stem very flat, dark, flat. His, you see, is one side, the light coming there, and then one stroke. No, it's strong and sturdy, and it looks cylindrical. In bamboo, look for two elements, only the stem and the leaves. The leaves, normally the standard leaves are three, like tree cloth, or four, crisscrossing each other. And when they crisscross, it has to be interlacing, to be space in between, to be loose, to be able to breathe, not clutter together. So with this, and then with the different tonation, Chinese ink, they have 5-6 color in black tone even. Different layers of tonality. The whole bamboo looks 3D, as though the wind is coming from that. That's why he's very, very special in bamboo. He can do this very fast, but look at simple, but yet it takes years and years of training to achieve it. And this is his bamboo. Well, the next one is his birds and flowers. He's able to capture the spirit of the bird's internal characteristics and birds beautifully. His birds were very lively. Page 38, page 38. So his birds are all very animated, very lively, with spirit and soul. We are talking about his birds and flowers. He portrayed the emotions and the spirit and the mood of the bird, of the object. That's why I look at the lone duck. The lone duck is with a drooping shoulder, drooping head, and a hunched shoulder, looking very sad, looking very insecure, because he lost his partner, or because he was lost his friends in the group. Even the bamboo, I was telling some of them, also look very sad, seemingly like in sympathy with the duck. It's not the bright with the sunlight, with the very happy bamboo. That piece is a very beautiful portrait of how he captured his objects' mood and emotions. In one occasion, during his 3 days before Mom going with Europe tour with him, they have a difference of opinion. And when we went home, we saw this bird, this painting. Both in opposite posture, different direction, but each stubbornly looking at a different view. And we knew they had some differences. And this is what we find, you know. So, you know, and my father also has this sense of wit and sense of humor. When he painted fish, what he say? He say he's saving the fishes from the fisherman's hooks. He making them alive. You know, he has that. So not many people know about that. This is how I try my best to know more of my father's work and appreciate the little things about his painting. And this is how I wish to share with you. And I hope you all will ponder a little longer and engage with him and enjoy his work as much as I enjoy his. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Fan was most well known in China for starting this Lingdong School of Art. Now, we don't really hear the term Lingdong School anymore, as opposed to its very famous counterpart, the Lingnan School. So, can you tell us a bit more about both the Lingdong School in China and also the Teochew community of artists and collectors in Singapore? There were many Teochew artists in Singapore, such as Chen Wenxi and Chen Chongsui, and also a lot of collectors such as Tan Zichaw, which together added up to a significant portion of the Singaporean art community.
Thank you, Yongchun. You're right. You know, we often hear of Lingnan, Hai Pai. Relatively speaking, Lingdong has not been much mentioned. But as early on, Yongchun, when he gave a survey of Fan Chang Tien's development in China during the 30s. Fan Chang Tien, together with Sun Peigu and Gao Zhenren or something like that, right? A few other friends got together and actually Gao Jianfu is actually Lingnan. Gao Zhenren. So Sun Peigu, they got together and actually started this Tao Sheng. Yi Tao means art waves, a society dedicated to the artists, and their work in the Teochew region, so to speak. Yeah, and this Teochew region actually is east of the mountain ranges, with 5 peaks, and the Guangdong side, it straddles the area straddles quite a wide area, but Lingnan actually is the other side where Gao Jianfu, Gao Qifeng, and Chen Shuren actually who established a different school of painting. So Lingdong, because Lingnan is relatively well known, and the way that Lingdong developed somehow did not become as well known as Lingnan. Yeah, because Lingnan actually later on also went to spread over to Hong Kong, where actually in Hong Kong there's a Lingnan section in the museum. Anyway, it's important to note that this Teochew school or style of painting, which actually was important because there were many Teochew from the Teochew region who in the early 20s and 30s went to Shanghai to study art. And as you all know, Fan Chang Tien is known for Hai Pai, right? The Shanghai school. But a lot of these Teochew students, having returned to Teochew after their studies in Shanghai, they went on to develop their own style. So this is an important development, which is natural in art, development, art history, where people, artists, having learned a certain style, having learned a certain tradition, go on to develop on their own, to their own style, their own characteristic, and so on. So that is what is meant by Lingdong. Although it's not as well known, it's probably not well known because it's like, as you observe, Lingdong style is characterized by greater inclinations towards the subtleties of ink painting rather than color, rather than modern Western elements like Lingnan and so on. So maybe because of that, Lingdong receives relatively less attention. But one of the founders together with Fan Chang Tien, Sun Peigu, was a very, very distinguished artist. He had very close relationship with Singapore, and he was active in Singapore for some years during the 20s. What makes him so important is this. In 1922, Sun Peigu, together with a lot of Teochew artists who were associated with Tuan Meng. Anybody educated in Tuan Meng? Yeah? Tuan Meng is a Teochew school who very early on, during the first decade of, established during the first decade of the 20th century, when they first established, they taught in Teochew. Yeah, the students were taught in Teochew, and the teachers were very particular about art and culture. Art, particularly calligraphy, right? Calligraphy. And Sun Pei-gu and others were involved in Tuanmeng. And Sun Pei-gu in 1922 established Huaqiao 美术学院, Huaqiao Overseas Chinese Art Academy. Very few people know this. Actually, we all know that in 1938, Lim Hak Dai established or founded the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts. But that was 1938. But well before that, Sun Pei-gu and others set up Nanyang 美术学院 in 1922. That was way earlier than NAFA, you know. It was an initiative by the Teochew community. Yeah, there was a Teochew businessman who actually, you know, provided financial backing, and there were these artists like Sun Pei-gu and so on who were prepared to teach and run the school and so on. Unfortunately, the school existed for only 2 years. Yeah, it closed, but we don't know why it closed. Maybe it was too early for its time, right? It was too early for its time. That development actually reflected the art activity within the Teochew community. Yeah, the many artists during that time in Singapore came from China, and you would expect many of them having come from the Teochew region, and they usually would have been educated in Shanghai and so on. So it's interesting that you should ask this, because in Singapore a disproportionate number of artists are Teochew, including collectors, art collectors. Yeah, all this has to do with Teochew, the region in China, being particularly concerned, particularly interested in art and culture. And it goes back a long time in history. During the Tang Dynasty, a poet, scholar poet, Han Yu, yeah, that was 1,200 years ago. He was exiled. He offended the emperor in the imperial court, and he was exiled to Chaozhou. Yeah, and his misfortune, his personal misfortune, was the good fortune of Chaozhou. Yeah, it's just like the personal misfortune of Chang Tien was the good fortune of Singapore. Yeah, he was exiled to Chaozhou area to be an official there. This was a huge demotion for an imperial official. You know, he was probably some minister or something like that. So he spent only 8 months in Chaozhou, but during the 8 months, he did so much for the Chaozhou people. One of the most famous, most celebrated thing that he did was he managed to clear the river Hanjiang of crocodiles. Before he came, the river was infested with crocodiles, became a hazard to the residents there. So when he arrived, there was this problem. So he thought of a way. In some mysterious way, he managed to do that. According to records, he actually wrote an essay, and then he read out. It's like a command to the crocodiles: "You better clear out before we kill you all," and something like that. So somehow it worked. Yeah, somehow it worked. So this essay has become one of the most celebrated essays in Chinese literature. And of course, the deed of chasing away the crocodiles also became one of the legends for Chaozhou. If you visit Chaozhou today, there are many places that commemorate the memory of Han Yu. Yeah, that was like 1,200 years ago. According to Rao Zhongyi, a Chinese scholar, the Chaozhou's preoccupation with art and culture had to do with this, as well as subsequently also in Tang Dynasty, there was this prime minister Zai Xiang called Li Deyu, yeah, Li Deyu, who was similarly exiled, exiled to Chaozhou, yeah. What happened or what he did during his exile wasn't much recorded, but there was this incident that happened. He had to go and by river, by ship to Chaozhou, and his ship, while approaching Chaozhou, his ship he met with a shipwreck, and the contents of his luggage and belongings and all that, including his art collection, yeah, were kind of spread and lost, So these two particular incidents, according to Rao Zhongyi, were the main sources of cultural influence, yeah, artistic legacy that spread. And imagine someone like Han Yu. People who were educated in Chinese would know Han Yu, right? He was one of the most distinguished, most outstanding poets and essayists in the Tang Dynasty, right? Tang Song Ba Da Jia. He was one of them. Tang Song Ba Da Jia refers to those writers who were good in prose. Yeah. So apart from poetry, Han Yu was also very good in prose. So being such a literary figure and arriving in Chaozhou was a big deal. Can you imagine how big the deal was when Cao Yu actually spent 8 months in Chaozhou, yeah, doing all those things, including driving away the crocodiles. Yeah, so he promoted education, he promoted art, and so on. So the fact that there are so many Teochew artists, Teochew collectors, are no accident, right? The fact that it's no mere chance. It has got to do, it goes back to all the way to this history, right? And early on, Teresa mentioned something about rootedness. I think rootedness is very important, yeah? Very often when people look at Fan Chang Tien's paintings, it's very easy to kind of jump to conclusion, oh, this is a bit too traditional and so on. Tradition is very important. It's because of this tradition that Fan Chang Tien was able to teach all these students who became important artists in Singapore. The immense contribution that Fan Chang Tien was able to make was because of this tradition, right? We often talk about tradition as something which is in opposition with modernity. With modernity, which is very unfortunate, because tradition is very important for people who want to create things that are modern. In the modern art practices, tradition is very important. The famous poet T.S. Eliot, when he talks about poetry, he mentioned tradition, yeah, in a very famous essay called Tradition and Individual Talent. Yeah, in which he actually mentioned something about a sense of history. If you want to be a poet, yeah, you need to have a sense of history. Yeah, and tradition is something that, according to him, that cannot be inherited. It just cannot be born with tradition. So tradition must be obtained with great labor, which means that, you want the tradition, you cannot be just born into it. You have to make the effort to acquire it, to learn about it. And that's what Fan Chang Tien did, right? That's what Fan Chang Tien's students did, right? And this is important. Actually, this is very also in keeping with what Confucius said about himself, about his attitude towards learning. He said, I'm not born with knowledge. 无非生而知之者. I'm not born with knowledge. I only love things that are old. I only love things that are old and pursue them, learn about them diligently. So there's this parallel, I think what we see, we study the life of Fan Chang Tien and a lot of great artists. We know how important we can understand how important tradition is. How important tradition is, because it is where we come from, right? It is how we are rooted. Yeah, how we what is it that gives us strength to create something new? Yeah. So the Teochew tradition, according to your question, how come there is, in Singapore there are the Chinese population, the Hokkien, the Fujian percentage of Fujian population is about is double of that of Teochew. But in the art and cultural scene, the art community, the Teochew being half as many as the Hokkien, the Fujian, far exceed their ratio. So I think this part of the Teochew history and Teochew heritage is very important. It is what determines which direction the cultural development and artistic development goes. Okay, thank you. And Fan Chang Tien, as you heard earlier, were excelled in 4 branches of ink art, right? One of them is also seal carving.
Talking about poetry, calligraphy, we just marvel when Paul and myself went through so many hundreds of Fan Chang Tien's poetry writing. And everyone is individually composed. And seldom you get 1 or 2 repeat. In fact, none at all. This is really wonderful. And also, you were saying about calligraphy, how important in Chinese writings. The unique difference between Western art and Chinese art is in writing. Do you find Western painting, calligraphy, or poetry? No. Shakespeare, Keats, Tennyson, all different form. No mix. Painting, all with. Chinese is the only one. The uniqueness is you have calligraphy, Chinese poetry, painting together. That is a very, very, obvious difference. That is how Chinese, the calligraphy, that's very important. Yeah, thank you.
So we'll move on to our last panelist, Mr. Ho. And I would like you to help us contextualize Mr. Fan's art a bit. So perhaps first you can describe what sort of traditions he's coming from, and then after that, Mr. Fan came to Singapore in 1954. It was 56. Sorry, it was a decade of importance to Singaporean art, and maybe you can help us understand what Mr. Fan's the context of Mr. Fan's art in the development of the Singaporean art narrative.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, well, Mr. Fan, right? We know he learned Chinese painting in China in the Xinhua Academy of Fine Art. So Xinhua Academy of Fine Art is placed in Shanghai, right? It's one of the first art schools, under the modern, Western influence kind of curriculum, because China before 1911 was under the Qing dynasty. It's actually a feudal state, right? So only after 1911, then I think the pace of modernization caught up. All right, so Chang Tien was learning under all these Hai Pai masters. But I think I would like to touch here what is actually Hai Pai, because this is I think a term not very familiar to most Singaporeans. All right, so first, how did this Hai Pai came about? Okay, because in the late Qing dynasty, maybe the second half of the 18th century. All right, so China is beginning to open up, not by her choice, but because the foreigners keep coming in. All right, so slowly Shanghai developed from a sleepy fishing town, all right, or village. Slowly it developed itself into an international port. All right, there are a lot of businessmen, and a lot of rich people, and art thrive in rich places. All right, you see art don't really thrive in very poor places, all right, because artists needs patronage, and the wealthy businessmen in Shanghai, Chinese have this tradition to collect. So a lot of artists went to Shanghai, and slowly Shanghai became a congregation of artists, and so the Shanghai school don't really have a fixed artistic style. From the early beginnings, you have people like Zhao Zhiqian, Xu Gu. Then, only when Wu Changshuo came into the picture, then, he became like the leader. So today, when we talk about Hai Pai, we usually reference to Wu Changshuo's art. Yeah. So as I say, Hai Pai is just a term used locally, and it came about because of economic reasons, all right, not because of a certain artistic style, but because when Wu Changshuo came into the picture, he was so famous, he became the leader. Then we sort of say that Hai Pai is Wu Changshuo, all right. But if you think about it, like Pu Hua, Ren Po Nian, they paint quite differently. So come back here. Chang Tien's teachers like Zhu Wenyun or even Pan Tian Shou, they are actually students of Wu Changshuo. So we can then have this lineage that Mr. Fan, right, Master Fan is actually coming from the style of Wu Changshuo. Right. So we want. Okay. So what is then the style of Wu Changshuo or Hai Pai, so to speak? So the first characteristic is actually this Hai Pai thing is a derivative of called literati painting. Then what is literati painting? Now, if we are more familiar with Western ideas, so if we think of along Western painting, what is a painting? It's a depiction of certain thing like landscape, portraiture, right? Actually, that's in a way, it's a Western concept. But for the Chinese, of course, the Chinese have court painters that serve the court, so they also do landscape. You know, they record what the emperor does and so forth. That's what we call. We can say that it's a functional. It's same like the Western painting because it has a functional role. But for the literati painting, all right, literati means what we call the scholars in China, because the scholars are the ruling class, right? Because in the past, if you are in China, you know, you take the imperial exam, and when you get some like Juren or you know whatever, like what the degree today, you know, you get certificate, right? Yeah, by passing the exam and so on and so forth, you get a job in the government, right? That's how you get. That's what the tradition people in China do, right? Yeah. So these people, right? They are not professional artists, you know, because that's not their main job. So they paint on the side. So they are not. Their painting is actually not intended to be functional, because they are not professional artists. All right. So they paint, and for in a way self-amusement, they paint to you know, for their own spiritual needs. So like for example, why people paint bamboos? Because bamboo actually signifies certain Chinese traditional virtues, and that's why Master Fan is so low profile, because that is linked to the traditional literati. You know, you're not a professional artist. You don't flaunt it. You know, it's for your own personal upbringing. All right, that's why the subject matter and so on and so forth, you know, is this way. Is birds, it's flowers, and it's for self-indulgence. It's for self-indulgence. So the Shanghai school, the subject matter wise, is the derivative of this type of literati painting. But having said that, because the practitioner in Shanghai school, they are professional artists, means that they need to sell their painting for a living. That's a bit different from their predecessors, where they probably is a court official. Like for example, Dong Qichang, you know, is a Ming Dynasty, a great painter. He's a minister of something like minister of manpower. He's not the full-time artist. Yeah. Then even the Si Wang and all this, they have jobs in the government, right? So, but the Shanghai school, because there's a need to sell paintings, so they also have to, like, whatever they paint need to be pleasing to their patrons, who are usually businessmen. So they actually incorporate some Western concepts. For example, they use bright colors like a kind of red, we call it Yang Hong, literally translated as a Western red, because traditionally, you know, they don't like the Chinese literati don't like loud paintings, right? So they borrowed some Western ideas. Yeah. Okay. The second aspect is the artists need to know poetry, calligraphy, painting, and seal carving. This one, actually, this is a very new idea. As in, before Wu Changshuo, right? In the whole Chinese history, nobody say that you have to be good in these 4 areas. So it's a very Wu Changshuo kind of concept. Yeah, but after Wu Changshuo, then for the Hai Pai practitioner, it become a must. All right, like if you don't have these 4, you are not qualified. Okay, so that's why in this exhibition, I think we are the first to show his stamp, you know, on the exhibition here. Okay, so yeah, this is very peculiar to the Hai Pai. All right, now the next thing is about the strokes. We have always been talking about calligraphic strokes, but what actually it is? Okay, now what happens is during the middle of the Qing dynasty, all right, the Chinese unearthed some old bone Jagu, the oracles, the oracle bones. And then there was like a fashionable trend, in the art circle to study the ancient calligraphy. So like this one, right? This is what we call a stele, right? In Chinese we call it bei. Okay, what happens is in the past, right? Because there's no there's no photocopy and printing. So what they do is they actually carve on the stone, and that's how they, it's a functional thing. But because some of the stone are written in a very good calligraphy, right? So, there's a technique to actually copy from the stone. So this is like a copy, right? Yeah. In Chinese we call tie. I mean we ta, right? Ta means it's called, in English it's called ink rubbing. Okay. So you can see here, this is a Han Dynasty clerical script ink rubbing. But because of weathering and all this, you find that actually you see the strokes, you can see that it's not smooth. Yeah? There's a lot of weathering things, and then there's places where it is there's a hole, and so on and so forth. And then it become, in Chinese it's called the Jing Si Wei. Right, literally translated is the flavor coming from bronzeware and stones. Right, this is a Jing Si Wei. So the Wu Chang Shuo is very intrigued by this kind of beauty. All right, so this is how it actually presents itself in calligraphy. So you can see that the strokes here, there's this this little like breakages. It's not a perfect round, but there's edges and so on and so forth. So it's coming from there. All right. So for Hai Pai or Wu Chang Shuo's kind of painting, the strokes all must have this, and this kind of strokes it want to evoke a feeling of grandeur, of power and strength. All right. It is also, this kind of concept is different from the past. All right, because earlier on, in the Ming Dynasty, maybe gracefulness is more important. 要雅, 文雅, right? But coming to this late Qing times, the grandeur, the power is very important. Yeah. So these are some of the characteristics we need to know about Shanghai School before you can actually understand Mr. Fan's work. Yeah. So how do we place Master Fan? All right. Now, if we look back at history, about Singapore art is actually a history about Chinese immigrants. All right. Unfortunately, we don't really know a lot about how the Malays and Indians, I mean, we don't really hear too much about them in the early histories. Yeah. But now for the Chinese immigrants, when they come to Singapore, I would say that they are faced with choice. What choice? Are they going to continue to be Chinese, or they want to change and adopt here? So these people, basically, I think they move into two groups. So one group is like Chong Su Pian and Chen Wen-si, This group, they say, oh, maybe we should evolve a little bit. Then they start going to the Nanyang type. The other group, like the Master Fan, they say we still remain traditional. All right? Yeah, and among this group of artists, I think personally, I think okay, what I'm going to say is very personal, okay, because some of you may not agree. I think two names will come out. One is Xi Hyang To, all right, and one is Master Fan. I think these two are the most important artists in that group of artists. That group who actually decided to remain in the traditional way. Okay, and I have to say that among these two, I think Master Fan is better. This is a very controversial statement because I think there are many student of Si Hyang To here. I think why I say that, okay, because I think Si Hyang To, hello, Si Hyang To, I think he's good, of course, and he produced many students, all right. But I think as compared to Master Fan progress another step. Why do I say that? I think Master Fan actually, despite being a high practitioner, he actually has his own style. Because you can see, that when you see a Fan Chang Tien painting, it's Fan Chang Tien and not Wang Geyi and not the rest. It's Fan Chang Tien. So, for example, like his birds, the Parker Miana, right, in English, minor, it's very him. All right, and of course, not forgetting his bamboos, right? Yeah, like he's the bamboo king. Second thing is about the deployment of small leaves here, and this one, small leaves. Okay, because usually traditional artists, they only know how to make this big leaf. So this is something very peculiar to him about the small leaf. Okay, I think I didn't really. He actually plays all these small leaves very strategically, that it makes the thing very alive. Okay, yeah, and the other thing is Chinese painting have this. Some people criticize Chinese painting as formula painting, means that you follow a formula. So a lot of Chinese painters, they actually don't go out there to look at the real thing. Yeah. But I think Master Fan must have spent a lot of time looking at the real bamboo, because you can see from the painting. So just now I said that the small leaf, because I think this is something peculiar to him. He somehow managed to catch it, that the other Chinese artists didn't manage to portray it. The second thing, if you look at the small branches, okay, usually the Chinese, most artists would only have one branch, but he put two. You may not find it, it's like no big deal, right? But actually, if you are doing the painting yourself, you find that to put two is actually not so easy from composition point of view, because it becomes too cluttered. So, for example, he put two here. He has a small one here. All right. So all these are things that make it interesting. Yeah. And then the last one is about the stroke itself. If you look at individual stroke, the leaf, right, seems to be like moving, Yeah. And if you look at other Chinese artists, it's kind of straight. When it's straight, it's more dead. So how he does it? The trick is, during the stroke, right, he actually turned the brush, the brush, so that it's kind of like dancing, it moves. Yeah, so this is something that his stroke is different from most other artists, or yeah, something like that. Okay, yeah.
Okay, Yong Chun also gave me a question to ask, why did Mr. Fang did not pursue the Nanyang art form? When Mr. Fang arrived in Singapore in 1956, many of his contemporary artists from China, like Chen Wenxi, Zheng Shuping, Chen Zhongshui, Zheng Shuping, and Liu Kang, they were already here in Singapore many years before him. They were all painting the local Southeast Asia scenes in the newly developed form known as the Nanyang style. But Mr. Fang did not follow that direction. Now, firstly, there were already many local artists painting the Nanyang style, the local scene, and that also was taught in secondary school. And moreover, there was already a formation of Nanyang Academy, which was known as the NAFA. When he came, that one was housed in St. Thomas Walk, in a bungalow in the St. Thomas Walk. That was the beginning of it. So the thing is, NAFA, the objective and the focus, light guys of NAFA, there were a few, especially one was to integrate the different culture of, essential culture of the four races. But the important one is the mixture of East and West art. They were supposed to have fusion of East and West art, and also to paint local scene, expression of local scene, which eventually lead to a new form style, the Nanyang style. That was entirely different from what Fang Chiang was rooted in, traditional style. Moreover, secondly, the most important one is back in China, Chairman Mao Zedong forbidden all the traditional literary art form. He summoned Li Keran and Lo Ming and also Chang Tien, three of the artists, especially Li Keran, who was the same year as Chang Tien, and also a Shanghai trained literary artist like Shanghai School of Art. And they said, Mao Zedong instructed them to paint for the glory and the success of the farmers and the laborers, and the liberation of the proletariat class. Those educated scholars, literary artists, they were all deemed as bourgeoisies, should be educated, sent to the farm and re-educated. So Fang Chiang Tien was caught. He was away from the upheaval in China, all this upheaval. He made a decision to carry on traditional art painting before it gets swept away, before it gets lost forever. Since so many painting the Nanyang style, Southeast Asian, the newly formed art style, whereas this traditional old age art style is going to be lost forever. So he made that decision. That is why he did not adopt the Nanyang style. That was partly quite of the main reason. Mr. Fang, though he did not choose the Nanyang style, but he painted local subjects, the minor, you see them around. And he also, in his inscriptions, the bamboos are everywhere. It's still here, also in Singapore. But he painted them, the sparrows, the miners, but all within the basic context of Chinese traditions and conventions. So his art became purely Chinese, though he painted the local subjects, fauna and flora. So his work was not adulterated at all by any Western influence, nor any new trend or new norm, like some new trend, the popular. So his work is like the classic music, more classical. So his work is very simple, spontaneous, in a class of his own, and it has a touch of that ancient, traditional kind of flavor. What you call in Chinese is like 古味道, 有一个古味, you look at it. So we find his work refreshing. And in fact, it's very different from so many of the contemporary. His work is contemporary, but you still the Gu Wei, and it's his own style. Like what he say, like Xu Ping say also, he developed his own style. He combined the past of what he learned, or the Su Fa and everything, and the Chun Fa, but he has his own style. So his work is in fact uniquely very different from many artists that we see. So we find it very refreshing and endearing. Chang Tien was a man of few words. What his philosophy, his outlook, his life. Some people will talk, some people will send to newspaper, will write, but for him, everything, his thoughts and everything are all inscribed in his poetry. So from his poetry in the painting, we can have a deeper insight into his individuality, into his outlook, his views on art and life, his philosophy. In this way, we are able to understand what he meant when he inscribed that. Well, what he meant by cleansing off. Sometimes in his poetry, he will say the dust of the bamboo leaves, how are we going to cleanse off the dust, and what he meant by that. Did he mean the corruption or the pollution? Like now, the pollution of plastics and the pollution of where to send the pollution to which country. He was talking about all that too. Is the pollution, did he mean by that? And the pollution and the corruption that is still so rampant in this way. So, and sometimes he will also inscribe about a lot of other things, which is we find still very relevant today. So I hope with the poetry and with what he has inscribed, we are able to engage him in a dialogue and understand when and how his state of mind when he created his work. And this is what I find in my research about my late father's work. And I hope all of you will also engage him in the dialogue, understand his poetry, and enjoy as much as I do enjoy his painting. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have some time now for questions if there's any.
Question for Mr. Teo. Mr. Teo, just now you mentioned this Teochew culture, right? And can you tell us a little bit about this Teochew culture that has influenced the development of this Ling Dong Pai of school of paintings? And how is this Ling Dong Pai school of painting different from the Hai Pai, where Chang Tien inherited his training? Yeah.
Generally speaking, whether Ling Nan or Ling Dong, they go back to Hai Pai. They go back to Hai Pai, right? And looking at Hai Pai actually was born in a place like Shanghai, where art patronage became very important, as just now Ho Xiaoping was mentioning. Yeah, patronage, and it was important for the mercantile class, the businessmen, to support the artists, right? So, and then in their own way, the businessmen had their own taste, right? So the Hai Pai became just now Yang Hong and so on. It became bolder, more color, stronger color and so on. So, and then later on, this Ling Nan also developed with the Western influence, especially Japanese influence and so on, and all these elements in Western art through Japan also kind of impact upon the Lingnan style painting, right? But somehow the Lingdong, as they evolved, they did not go the way like going for very strong color. They also, while they are trying to develop, they retain much of that traditional style or aesthetics. You know, it's like you look at Chang Tien and Sun Pei-gu. If you look at, I'm not very familiar with Sun Pei-gu's art, but according to records, he was also a modern, progressive-looking. Yet the Lingdong generally is known to be more inclined toward the traditional aesthetics, the literati style, rather than going the way Lingnan, going for trying to absorb the Western influence, you know, shading, background, and so on. You know, Lingdong somehow didn't do that. Yeah, and that is the main difference, I think. Yeah, I don't know whether you can add anything.
No, I also learned. I asked also what Lingdong and Lingnan. Before that, the whole region was all Lingnan, all Lingnan. And Lingnan is, is the group of two brothers, 那叫什么？高剑锋 and 江其峰 and 还有一个陈树人 yeah, they went to learn Japanese. They went to Japanese to learn the art back. Whereas this side, a lot of Teochew, all this region, went to Shanghai, local. Then they say, we should be Lingdong and not Lingnan. So they formed the Lingdong. That is later. And the Lingnan Pai, they normally draw wet on wet. They are their paints are all wet in wet. That's why I learned. I don't know how. I'm not an artist, but whereas the Lingdong is dry on dry, and Lingdong the colors are more subtle. The colors normally is the old one was black and white, but because of the Wu Chang soap, they introduced a color, so it must see subtle color. Whereas the Lingnan Pai is more wet on wet and more colorful. And that is what I learned. Last thing I want to say is traditional Chinese in painting is a timeless artistic heritage of Chinese culture. And what I want to say is we as Singaporean in a multinational society, we should also celebrate it as one of our cultural heritage. Just like we celebrate the Indian dance, Indian culture, the arts and crafts of Malay culture. So it should be, Chinese should be also our Singaporean Chinese identity. Do you all agree? You think we should stress on that? This is also our heritage, timeless heritage, our Singaporean identity. That's what the last thing I want to say. All right, you finalize.
Are there any more questions? Okay, then thank you for coming and attending to our exhibition. Okay, and we'll end our panel here.